welcome to the Deep Dive. Your shortcut to being truly well-informed, packed with surprising facts, and just enough humor to keep you hooked. Today, we're plunging into a topic that touches everyone, yet, well, few truly master money. But this isn't about complex formulas or market predictions. No, this deep dive is about the psychology of money and how your behavior, not necessarily how smart you are, is the real secret to financial success. Let me set the stage with this really fascinating contrast, a story that kind of brings this whole idea to life. Picture a tech executive, okay, a genuine genius. In his 20s, designed and patented key components in Wi-Fi routers, built and sold multiple companies, wild success. Yet, his relationship with money, it was this volatile mix of insecurity and, frankly, just childish stupidity.
Right, the kind of behavior that just makes you shake your head.
Exactly. We're talking about a guy who carried bricks of $100 bills, bragged constantly. And once, just for kicks, threw $1,000 gold coins into the Pacific Ocean, like skipping them like rocks.
You're kidding. $1,000 a pop.
Yep. And a few days later, different story, same theme. He shattered a $500 lamp in a hotel. And then, in this fit of arrogance, threw $5,000 at the manager, telling him never to insult him again.
Wow. Just wow.
Yeah. So you can probably guess how long that lifestyle lasted. Not long. He ended up completely broke. Now, contrast that with Ronald James Reed. His Wikipedia entry literally starts. Ronald James Reed was an American philanthropist, investor, janitor, and gas station attendant.
Quite the list, janitor and philanthropist.
Right. Born in rural Vermont, first in his family to graduate high school. He fixed cars for 25 years, swept floors at JCPenney for 17, bought a modest two-bedroom house for $12,000 at age 38, lived there his whole life. When he died in 92, back in 2014, he made international headlines. Why?
Because of the money, I assume.
Exactly. Out of over 2.8 million Americans who died that year, fewer than 4,000 had a net worth over $8 million. Ronald Reed, he was one of them.
You're no way. The janitor.
The janitor.
Yeah.
Left $2 million to his stepkids, over $6 million to his local hospital and library. His secret. He saved what little he could, invested in blue chip stocks.
Yeah.
Big, stable companies.
Yeah.
And then just waited for decades as tiny savings compounded.
What an incredible contrast. It really highlights the core idea we're digging into today. Financial outcomes aren't primarily about equations or spreadsheets. Not really. They're about how you behave. It's a soft skill, often underappreciated. Because finance is usually taught like physics, right? With these rigid rules and laws.
Yeah, it's all just math.
But money, it's guided by people's behaviors. And as we'll explore, those behaviors are deeply personal, sometimes counterintuitive. So our mission today is to help you make better financial decisions by truly understanding these often overlooked behavioral aspects.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our first powerful insight. When we look at someone else's money decisions, we often scratch our heads, right? We think, why do people do seemingly crazy things? But what this deep dive suggests is maybe the idea that anyone is crazy is just a misunderstanding of their unique experiences.
Exactly. That's the core of it. What truly resonates here is how profoundly our personal history anchors our beliefs about money. And that history is often just a tiny, tiny sliver of what's actually happened in the world.
Right.
People from different generations, different backgrounds, different economic realities, they learn completely different lessons. So what seems totally irrational to you might be perfectly logical to someone else, based purely on their life.
Yeah, it reminds me of that story about JFK. When he was running for president, a reporter asked him about the Great Depression. And he basically said, I have no firsthand knowledge of it. My family had a great fortune. It was worth more than ever then. We had bigger houses, more servants, we traveled more.
Wow. So his understanding was purely academic.
Purely academic. From reading about it at Harvard. Not like the millions who lived through it, who carried those emotional scars. Or think about someone who grew up during high inflation versus stable prices. Their view on bonds. Totally different. One sees a wealth incinerator, the other sees stability.
So if we don't get these different perspectives, how can we possibly understand financial behavior? It's a real challenge. We all think we know how the world works, right? But we've only experienced this tiny fraction of it. Like your personal experiences with money, maybe 0.0000001% of what's happened globally. But they probably make up like 80% of how you think the world works. That anchoring is incredibly powerful.
And this really explains things that on the surface look irrational, like lottery tickets. Did you know Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, video games, music, sports, and books combined?
That's staggering.
It is, and who buys them? Mostly lower-income individuals. The lowest-income households spend, on average, $412 a year. That's 4 times what the highest-income groups spend. And often, these are the same folks who say they couldn't cover a $400 emergency.
Which sounds completely backward if you're just looking at the number.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It seems baffling. But from their perspective, one of our sources puts it so well. They basically say, buying a lottery ticket is the only time we can hold a tangible dream of getting the good stuff you already have. We are paying for a dream. And you may not understand that because you are already living a dream.
Wow. That really reframes it.
Isn't it? It's such a powerful reminder.
Yeah.
No one's crazy. They're just making decisions based on their own unique experiences, their own reality that made perfect sense to them in that moment.
Okay, so building on that, what does this mean for us?
Well, it means financial outcomes are often driven by forces way beyond our individual effort, luck and risk. They're like siblings, fundamentally intertwined.
Always present, but so hard to pin down.
Totally. It's incredibly hard to measure their role, maybe even accept it sometimes. But they're always there. And because of this, when you're judging financial success, yours or someone else's, it's probably never quite as good or quite as bad as it seems on the surface.
That's such a crucial point. Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, attributing success only to effort or failure only to bad decisions, it just completely overlooks this huge influence of luck and risk. You know, you're just one person in this massive game with billions of others, infinite moving parts, the accidental impact of things outside your control, often way more consequential than the stuff you consciously do.
Let's look at Bill Gates again.
Yeah.
He had what you could call 1 in a million luck. Attending one of the only high schools in the world with a computer back in 1968 when he was in 8th grade.
That's incredible luck. Unbelievable, almost.
Right. His school's mother's club used rummage sale money to lease this advanced computer. Most universities didn't have that then, but at the same school there was Ken Evans, his friend. Just as smart, just as ambitious. Tragically, Ken experienced 1 in a million risk. He died in a mountaineering accident before they could build Microsoft together.
Wow. Same force, luck, or risk, just pointing in opposite directions.
Exactly. The same force, totally different outcomes.
That's a really poignant example, and it drives home why it's probably more useful to focus on broad patterns of success and failure, rather than trying to perfectly copy these extreme individual examples, you know? Like, think about historical figures. Cornelius Vanderbilt, John D. Rockefeller. Vanderbilt's advisor told him his deals broke the law. Vanderbilt basically said, "You don't think you can run a railroad following the law, do you?"
So blatant disregard was part of the strategy.
It seems like it. Their law-flaunting actions were central to their success, so was it brilliant strategy or just incredible luck they didn't get shut down? The line between bold and reckless is razor thin, and you often only see it in hindsight.
Yeah.
Even Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, right? He credited his own success largely to one massive lucky break, owning a huge chunk of Geico stock, which he admitted actually broke his own rules about diversification.
So even the masters acknowledge luck's role.
Absolutely. It's a messy reality, not neat formulas.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. And I think it's a danger that so many of us, maybe all of us, face. It's this insatiable appetite for more and the often elusive wisdom of knowing when you actually have enough.
Yes, the enough problem.
Yeah.
Crucial.
There's this great little anecdote about Joseph Heller, the author of Catch-22. He's at a party thrown by some billionaire hedge fund manager. Kurt Vonnegut points out that the host made more money in one day than Heller ever made from his super famous novel.
Ouch. That's got to sting a little.
You'd think. But Heller's response was just perfect. They said, yes, but I have something he will never have. Enough. Just that one word, enough. Seems so simple, but wow, does it hold power.
It absolutely does. Because think about it. There is no rational reason to risk what you have and truly need for something you don't have and honestly don't need. It seems obvious, but
we see people do it all the time. The dangers of this never enough mindset are everywhere. Think of Rajat Gupta. Orphaned as a teen, becomes CEO of McKinsey, phenomenally successful, worth like $100 million.
An unimaginable amount for most people.
Totally. Yet, he desperately wanted to be a billionaire. Ends up going to prison for insider trading. He risked everything, reputation, freedom, family, for money he absolutely did not need.
Such a tragedy, and completely self-inflicted.
And Bernie Madoff, already incredibly wealthy. but driven by that same insatiable desire for more, builds a massive Ponzi scheme. Even the geniuses at long-term capital management, multimillionaire traders, Nobel laureates on board, they lost everything in 1998. And not even in a crash. It was the middle of a bull market.
Because they risked what they had and needed?
For what they didn't have and didn't need. It's this recurring pattern.
Which really raises an important question for all of us listening, right?
Yeah.
What are you truly risking, and for what potential gain? Really think about that trade-off, because the hardest financial skill, arguably, is stopping that goalpost from moving, just deciding, this is enough.
And social comparison makes that so hard.
Oh, it's brutal. It's a battle you can never win because the ceiling just keeps going up. Someone always has more. Knowing when you have enough is the absolute best way to protect the things that actually matter. Your reputation, your freedom, your family, your happiness. These things are priceless. Never worth risking, no matter the potential upside.
Okay, let's shift gears. Time to explore one of the most powerful, yet really counterintuitive forces in money, compounding. This idea that small, consistent efforts over long periods can lead to extraordinary results, almost unbelievable sometimes.
Yeah, our brains aren't really built to grasp it intuitively.
Think about ice ages. How did the Earth get covered in miles-thick ice? That takes a staggering amount of energy, right? Scientists figured out it was caused by tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in Earth's orbital tilt, compounded over tens of thousands of years.
Tiny shifts over vast timescales.
Exactly. As one glaciologist put it, it is not necessarily the amount of snow that causes ice sheets, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts. A little bit of growth, serving as fuel for future growth.
Sure.
It just leads to results that defy our normal linear way of thinking.
And that's exactly what's fascinating and why it's tricky with money. Our brains struggle with exponential growth. Like if I ask you to calculate 8 plus 8 plus 8 9 times, you can do it in your head probably. But if I ask you to calculate 8 times 8 times 8 9 times, your head just kind of explodes, right?
Mine does, yeah.
We think linearly, not exponentially, and that's crucial for understanding and building.
You know, apply this to Warren Buffett. There are literally thousands of books about how he built his fortune, but very few focus on the simplest fact. He's been a good investor since he was basically a kid. Of his, $84.5 billion net worth, an incredible $84.2 billion was accumulated after his 50th birthday.
Wow, almost all of it.
Almost all of it.
Yeah.
And $81.5 billion after his mid-60s. His skill is investing, yes, but his real secret, the thing that makes him such an anomaly, it's time. Longevity. If he'd started in his 30s and retired in his 60s like most people, we probably wouldn't have ever heard of him.
That's such a great illustration. And consider Jim Simons, right? Head of Renaissance Technologies. He's compounded money at an absolutely astonishing 66% annually since 1988. That blows Buffett's 22% out of the water.
Higher returns.
Way higher. Yet Simons' net worth is still about 75% less than Buffett's. Why? Because Simons didn't really find his investing stride until he was 50. He's had less than half as many years to compound.
So time beats even incredible talent in the long run.
In many ways, yes. It shows that good investing isn't necessarily about chasing the absolute highest returns, which are often impossible to sustain anyway. It's more about earning pretty good returns that you can actually stick with consistently for the longest possible time. That's when compounding really takes off and does its magic.
Okay, so if compounding requires time, then staying in the game is paramount, which leads to our next point. Getting money seems to require risk, optimism, maybe some boldness, but keeping it. That demands a totally different set of skills. Humility, frugality, and frankly, a healthy dose of paranoia. Survival, it turns out, might be the single most important financial skill.
That's right. It's about avoiding ruin at all costs, because very few gains are so great that they're worth the risk of being completely wiped out.
Look at Jesse Livermore, probably the greatest stock trader of his day. Made the equivalent of over $3 billion with a B during the 1929 crash by shorting the market. Became one of the richest men in the world.
Incredible timing, incredible nerve.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But then, overconfidence kicked in. He made bigger and bigger bets, lost it all, and eventually, tragically, took his own life. And
Yeah.
was phenomenal at getting wealthy, but absolutely terrible at staying wealthy.
A classic cautionary tale.
Contrast that with Michael Moritz, the billionaire head of Sequoia Capital, the venture capital firm. He attributes their 4 decades of success to always being afraid of going out of business.
Wow. Even at the top, that fear persists.
Yeah. When asked if he meant only the paranoid survive, he said, There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
It's about the ability to just stick around a very, very long time without getting wiped out or being forced to quit.
That longevity piece is key. Connecting back to compounding. Think about Buffett again. He didn't get carried away with debt, right? He didn't panic and sell during the, 14 recessions he's lived through.
He held on.
He held on. He didn't trash his business reputation. He survived.
Yeah.
And that survival gave him the longevity that let compounding work wonders. Or consider Rick Gagarin. He was the third member of that famous Buffett-Munger investing trio. Buffett said Gagarin was just as smart as them.
But yeah.
He was in a hurry. In the 73-74 downturn, Gagarin got wiped out. He was using margin loans, borrowing against his investments. He was forced to sell his shares at the bottom, while Buffett and Munger, who had that survival skill, held on and thrived.
So being smart wasn't enough. He lacked the staying power.
Exactly. Staying wealthy is a different game than getting wealthy.
Which leads perfectly into this next idea, one of the most underappreciated forces in finance, I think, and one of my favorites. Having room for error, sometimes called a margin of safety. It's basically about planning on your plan, not going exactly according to plan. Because, let's face it, it rarely does.
Right. Building in a buffer for the unexpected.
Yeah. It's like blackjack card counting. Even if you know you have a statistical edge over the house. A successful card counter needs enough capital, they call it 100 basic units, to ride out the inevitable losing streaks.
Yeah.
You need that buffer, that room for error, so bad luck doesn't wipe you out before your edge can pay off.
That's a great analogy. And Benjamin Graham, we mentioned him earlier, he summed it up perfectly. He said, "The purpose of the margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary."
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
Render the forecast unnecessary.
Yeah. It's not just about being conservative for the sake of it. It's about increasing your odds of survival so you can actually stick around long enough to benefit from favorable long-term odds. The bigger your margin of safety, the smaller your actual edge needs to be for things to still turn out okay.
Bill Gates got this early on, when Microsoft was just starting out. His rule, which seemed incredibly conservative, was to always have enough cash in the bank to cover a year's worth of payroll, even with zero incoming revenue.
Wow, a full year. That's a serious buffer.
Serious buffer.
Yeah.
And Warren Buffett, same thing. He's always pledged to run Berkshire Hathaway with more than ample cash. He prioritizes peace of mind over squeezing out every last potential penny of profit. He actually said he wouldn't trade even a night's sleep for the chance of extra profits.
That says it all, doesn't it? The value he places on that safety net.
It really does.
And what's fascinating here, I think, is the gap between what you can technically endure, like on a spreadsheet, and what's emotionally possible for you. That gap is a crucial, often overlooked type of room for error.
Say more about that.
Well, a financial model might show you can handle, say, a 50% drop in your portfolio. Technically, you survive, but how will you actually feel when that happens? Looking at your family, wondering if you've messed up their future, that's a different calculation. That's where just plain old savings cash without a specific spending goal attached becomes so valuable.
Just cash in the bank?
Yeah, it gives you flexibility. It buys you time to think, to adapt, to wait for better opportunities. It protects you from those truly unforeseeable risks. Like there's this story about a sophisticated German tank unit in World War II. Apparently, they were defeated by field mice eating the electrical insulation in their tanks.
No way. Field mice.
Field mice. You can plan for enemy tanks, for air attacks. But mice, you need room for error because crazy, unpredictable stuff just happens.
Okay, so we plan for decades, right? Financial plans, career plans, they often span our whole adult lives. But here's the kicker. You are not static. The person you are today is not the person you'll be in 10, 20, 30 years. And our future selves.
Yeah.
Turns out they're notoriously bad at predicting what they'll actually want.
Oh, absolutely. The end of history illusion, psychologists call it.
Right. Tell us about that.
Well, it's this fascinating thing humans do. We can clearly recognize how much we've changed in the past, our tastes, our beliefs, our priorities. But then we tend to assume that the person we are right now is pretty much the finished product. We underestimate how much will continue to change in the future.
Craig, we've reached the end of our personal history.
Exactly. So we make these big life-altering decisions based on who we are today, decisions that shape the person we become. And then sometimes when we become that person, we look back and think, oh, what was I thinking?
Yeah, I had a friend like that. His life's mission as a teenager, become a doctor. Against all odds, he pushed, worked incredibly hard, finally did it, like a decade older than his classmates. I talked to him a few years later, asked how it was going. His immediate response, awful career, man.
Oh, wow. After all that effort.
Yeah. The stress, the hours, it just wore him down completely. He seemed as disappointed then as he was driven back when he started. We see it everywhere, right? People removing tattoos their teenage selves paid good money for, people divorcing someone their younger self rushed to marry.
We evolve. Our desires change.
So this poses a fundamental challenge for any kind of long-term planning, especially financial planning. How do you make enduring decisions when your view of what you'll actually want is likely to shift, maybe dramatically? Our financial lives might be less like one continuous 80-year plan and more like several distinct 20-year blocks.
That's a really good way to put it. And it's incredibly hard not to interrupt a planned career, investments, spending when what you want out of life fundamentally changes.
So what's the takeaway here? How do we deal with this evolving self?
Well, one implication is probably to avoid the extreme ends of financial planning. Like assuming you'll be perfectly happy living on a shoestring budget forever. Risky. Or committing yourself to work 80 hours a week indefinitely to chase some huge income goal. Also risky. Both extremes dramatically increase the odds you'll regret it later when future you shows up with different priorities.
So balance is key.
Balance is absolutely key. It helps you endure the plan, it provides flexibility, and it also means being willing to change your mind, being willing to abandon sunk costs. Like that career path you chose when you were 18. If it's making miserable future you unhappy, you need the courage to walk away. The quicker you can accept the change and pivot, the sooner you can get back to compounding your efforts and your happiness in a direction that actually fits who you've become.
Okay, this next point always gives me pause. It's the idea that every worthwhile financial gain has a price. But this price, it's often completely invisible, hidden, until you're already paying it, maybe without even realizing it.
It's so true. And that price isn't just dollars and cents, right? The price of successful investing, for instance, is dealing with volatility. It's enduring fear, doubt, uncertainty. It's managing regret. These are real costs. But they're easy to ignore when you're just looking at a historical chart showing upward growth.
Right, like the S&P 500. It went up, what, 119-fold in the 50 years ending 2018? Sounds easy on paper. Just buy and hold, sit back, let your money grow.
If only.
Yeah. The hidden price tag for that amazing return was living through constant periods of gut-wrenching volatility. Market crashes, deep recessions, wars, crises. Uncertainty was the norm, not the exception. And lots of people try to get the return without paying that price. They try to time the market, right?
The classic mistake, sell before the downturn, buy back before the recovery.
Exactly. But studies, like one from Morningstar, show these tactical funds trying to dodge downturns. They usually underperform simple buy and hold. The irony is, by trying to avoid paying the price of volatility, they often end up paying double in missed gains and trading costs.
And this is where a mental shift is really helpful. Think of market volatility not as a fine, like a penalty for doing something wrong that you should avoid, but think of it as a fee, a necessary cost you pay to access potentially higher long-term returns.
A fee for admission to the ride.
Precisely. If you see it as a fee, something normal and expected, you're much more likely to stick around. You maintain the mindset needed to endure the inevitable bumps and actually let compounding work its magic over the long haul. Otherwise, you risk falling into the trap of, say, companies like GE under Jack Welch. They famously smoothed out their earnings reports to avoid showing volatility, looked great for a while, but eventually the bill came due and they faced massive losses. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did similar things, hiding risk to create an illusion of smoothness. We know how that ended.
Yeah, you can't avoid the price forever. It catches up.
It always does.
Okay, next up. It's so easy to get swayed by what other people are doing with their money. Other investors, other consumers. We see the results or their possessions, but we often forget a crucial thing. They might be playing a completely different game than you are.
That's a critical distinction, hugely important, because investors and people in general have wildly different goals, different time horizons, different tolerances for risk. So what is totally irrational from your perspective might make perfect sense for someone else, given the specific game they're playing.
Like the dot-com bubble back in the late 90s, or the housing bubble in the mid-2000s. Those were fueled largely not by people thinking about 30-year investment horizons.
No, not at all.
But by short-term traders, day traders, house flippers. They didn't care about long-term value. They only cared if the price would go up in the next day or week or month. So paying a seemingly crazy price made perfect sense to them in their game if they thought they could sell it higher to someone else quickly.
Right. Different game, different rules, different definition of rational.
And it's not just investing, is it? It's consumer spending, too. We fall into these social comparison traps. We see our neighbor's new car, our colleague's big house, photos of fancy vacations, but we don't see their goals. We don't see their savings rate, their debt load, their anxieties. We don't see the context of their game.
Exactly. Let's see the results, not the reasoning or the trade-offs.
Yeah.
So the natural question then becomes, how do you avoid getting sucked into playing someone else's game? Especially when it's not right for you.
Yeah. How?
You have to consciously define your own financial game. What are your goals? What's your time horizon? What level of risk are you comfortable with? That young lawyer trying to make partner might need the fancy suit and car as part of his game. But if you're, say, a writer working from home and his spending sets your expectations, you could end up financially stressed without getting any of the career benefits he might be aiming for.
So know yourself, know your goals, and tune out the noise.
Pretty much. The goal isn't necessarily to be the smartest investor or the richest person on the block. The goal is to figure out what works for you in your specific circumstances and then have the discipline to stick with it.
Okay, let's talk about pessimism. It seems to hold this powerful, almost magnetic appeal, doesn't it? It often just sounds smarter, more sophisticated, maybe more plausible than optimism.
It really does, and there are reasons for that. First, true optimism isn't about being blindly cheerful or ignoring risks. It's more subtle. It's the belief that despite setbacks, the odds generally favor a good outcome over the long run. It's the idea that most people wake up trying to solve problems and make things a little better. But pessimism, it grabs our attention more easily.
Why is that?
Well, for one thing, money is universal. It affects everyone. So bad financial news, like a looming recession, feels immediately relevant and threatening to almost everybody. It gets clicks, it gets eyeballs. A hurricane hitting Florida, while devastating for those affected, doesn't pose the same direct, immediate threat to someone in, say, Chicago. Financial threats feel more encompassing.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Second, pessimists often just extrapolate current negative trends indefinitely into the future. They fail to account for how markets and, crucially, people adapt and innovate. Remember the peak oil predictions from 2008? Doommongers said we'd run out by 2030 based on current consumption.
I remember that.
Ah,
Total panic.
Right. But they completely missed the boat on innovations like fracking, which unlocked vast new reserves and totally changed the energy landscape. Pessimism often overlooks ingenuity.
Good point.
And third, there's just how our brains are wired. Evolutionarily, we're more attuned to threats than opportunities. Makes sense for survival, right? The caveman who constantly worried about saber-toothed tigers probably lived longer than the optimistic one who didn't. So pessimism feels more instinctual.
Our inner caveman prefers bad news.
Kind of. Plus, progress usually happens slowly, incrementally. It's hard to notice day to day. Think about medical advances, like the huge drop in heart disease deaths over decades. It saves hundreds of thousands of lives, but it's slow, steady progress. But setbacks, a market crash, a plane crash, they happen quickly, dramatically. They sear themselves into our memory.
So bad news is fast and loud. Good news is slow and quiet.
Often, yes. Pessimism also has the benefit of lowering expectations. If you predict doom and things just turn out okay, it feels like a win. But understanding these biases, why pessimism is so seductive, helps us appreciate the quieter but ultimately more powerful long-term pull of optimism.
All right, let's talk about stories, narratives. They're arguably one of the most potent forces in the economy. Maybe in our lives overall, wouldn't you say? We tell ourselves stories to make sense of a complicated, often random world, even if those stories are, well, maybe just appealing fictions.
Absolutely. Humans are storytelling animals. We crave narrative, and especially when the stakes are high, like with money, and our sense of control feels limited, we become incredibly willing to believe almost anything that offers a clear explanation or a path forward. Even if it's not entirely based on fact, it gives us this comforting illusion of control in situations that are inherently uncertain.
You know, think about Armistice Day, end of World War I, 1918. People desperately wanted to believe the narrative that this was the war to end all wars.
Yeah.
That there would be no more war ever again.
A deeply appealing fiction, as history tragically showed.
Exactly. Or during the Great Plague of London. People were terrified, desperate. They fell for all sorts of quack remedies, these infallible preventive pills, because they desperately needed to believe something could save them. In finance, we see it constantly. Why do people listen to financial forecasts that are consistently wrong?
Right. Or why do they pour money into actively managed mutual funds when the vast majority, like 85% over a decade, fail to even beat their simple benchmark index?
Yeah, why?
Because the stakes are so high with money. Our future, our security. And the desire to believe that someone, somewhere, has the secret sauce, that extreme rewards are possible if you just find the right person or strategy. That desire makes us incredibly susceptible to compelling stories. People believed Bernie Madoff's story because they wanted to believe they'd found the next Warren Buffett, that effortless high returns were real.
The story was too good not to believe, for some.
Precisely. So it forces us to ask, how much of what we think we know about finance, about the economy, is based on solid evidence? And how much is based on narratives we've constructed, consciously or unconsciously, to fill in the blind spots, to make it all feel less random?
We tend to overemphasize skill, right?
Yeah.
And downplay luck.
Hugely. We focus on what we know or think we know, and we conveniently ignore the vast ocean of what we don't know. Acknowledging this inherent messiness, resisting that seductive illusion of control, it's absolutely vital for making truly robust financial decisions. It's hard to admit how much is out of our hands, so we cling to stories that tell us otherwise.
Okay, so after digging through all of this, the psychology, the biases, the stories, what do? We can't sit here and tell you exactly what to do with your money. We don't know you. We don't know your goals, your timeline, your fear, your dreams. Financial advice is kind of like medicine, isn't it? A doctor knows the science, what generally works. But ultimately, the patient decides which treatment aligns with their values in life.
That's a great analogy. But what we can do is share some universal truths, some core principles that, based on everything we've discussed, tend to lead to better outcomes over time. The patterns, not the prescriptions.
All right, let's synthesize. What are the key takeaways?
Okay, first, humility and forgiveness. Be humble when you succeed, compassionate when you fail. Remember, luck and risk play a huge role, both for you and for others. It's rarely as good or as bad as it looks.
Less judgment, more understanding.
Exactly. Second, less ego, more wealth. Remember, wealth isn't what you spend, it's the income you don't spend. It's the cars not bought, the diamonds not purchased. Suppress some of today's desires for more freedom and options tomorrow. A high savings rate is key regardless of your income.
Wealth is what you don't see.
Precisely. Third, embrace imperfection, or maybe manage messiness. Most things in life, and definitely in investing, won't go perfectly. Many individual bets will be wrong or just average. That's okay. You can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune if your winners work well enough. Focus on your overall portfolio's trajectory, not every single decision.
Don't sweat the small stuff, basically.
Kind of. Fourth, value time control. This is huge. Use money to gain control over your time. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That's the highest dividend money pays. It's priceless. Freedom. Fifth, choose kindness over flash. Seriously. No one is impressed with your possessions as much as you are. People might admire your stuff, but they admire you for humility, kindness, empathy, not horsepower.
Good reminder in today's world.
Sixth, save without a specific goal. Just save. Savings are your hedge against life's inevitable surprises, that buffer, that room for error we talked about. It gives you options, flexibility, and resilience for things you can't even imagine yet.
The ultimate safety net.
Seventh, define and pay the price. Know that volatility, fear, uncertainty, they aren't fines to be avoided. They are the fees you pay for the potential of decent long-term market returns. Accept the fee, pay it willingly, and you're more likely to stick around to collect the reward.
Reframe volatility as a fee. I like that.
Eighth, worship room for error, that margin of safety, that gap between what could happen in a worst-case scenario and what needs to happen for you to be okay. It's endurance insurance. It's what allows compounding to work its magic over the really long term by keeping you in the game.
Protects you from the mice.
Protects you from the mice. Ninth, avoid extremes. Remember the end of history illusion. Your future self will be different. Your goals will change. So strive for balance today, moderate savings, reasonable work hours, flexible plans to minimize future regret.
Don't lock future you into a corner.
Exactly. 10th, like risk, but fear ruin. They're different. Taking calculated risks is often necessary for growth, but avoid, at all costs, any risk that has the potential to genuinely wipe you out. Even if the odds seem favorable, if the downside is complete ruin, it's just not a smart bet.
Survival first.
Survival first. 11th, know your game. Don't let the goals, strategies, or results of other people who are playing a completely different game with different rules and timelines unduly influence your own financial plan. Define what success means for you and stick to your game.
Stay in your own lane.
And finally, number 12, respect the mess. Accept that finance is messy. Smart, reasonable, informed people can and will disagree. There's rarely one single right answer. There's only the answer that works best for you, given your unique circumstances and psychology.
Wow. It's a fantastic summary. Humility, saving, time, room for error, knowing yourself. Powerful stuff.
It all comes back to behavior, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought for your own deep dive. Consider the absolutely profound economic growth and the huge societal shifts that have happened just since, say, 1945, the end of World War II. So much of it, the technologies, the globalization, the social changes, was utterly unforeseeable, completely counterintuitive back then. So the question is, what unseen, surprising forces might be shaping your financial future right now? And more importantly, how are you building the flexibility, the room for error, the resilience to adapt and thrive in a world that you can be sure will always find new ways to surprise you?